nothing ever really changed. Fields stretched for miles around the village, and the only road that led in or out was a narrow dirt path that twisted through thick forests. During the day, the village felt peaceful. Farmers worked in their fields, children ran through dusty streets, and old men gathered under the large banyan tree near the market to talk about things that had happened decades ago. But when the sun went down, everything changed. Because this village had a secret. At the very end of the village stood an ancient temple. The temple was older than anyone could remember. No one knew who built it. No one knew exactly how long it had been there. The stone walls were cracked and covered with vines, and the large wooden doors had dark stains that no one could explain. During the day, villagers visited the temple to pray, but after sunset, no one went near it, especially not after midnight, because the villagers believed something lived inside that temple, something that didn't belong in the world of the living. And the strange thing was, the villagers didn't talk about it openly. They never explained it to outsiders, but every child who grew up in the village heard the same warning from their parents. Never go near the temple at night, because sometimes people saw a shadow moving inside the temple, a shadow that didn't belong to anyone. And the worst part was, every time someone saw that shadow, something terrible happened the next day. Sometimes it was an accident, sometimes livestock mysteriously died, and sometimes a person disappeared. No one could explain why, but the pattern was always the same. Someone saw the shadow, and the village paid the price. For years, people avoided the temple at night. Even the bravest villagers refused to walk near it after dark. Until one evening, a man named Daniel Carter arrived in the village. Daniel wasn't from there. He was a traveler, a photographer who spent his time exploring remote places around the world. Old villages, forgotten towns, places that most people had never heard of. Daniel loved capturing stories with his camera. And when he heard about a mysterious village temple deep in the countryside, he knew he had to see it. When he arrived, the villagers welcomed him politely, but they also seemed nervous, almost as if they didn't want him staying too long. Daniel noticed it immediately. Whenever he mentioned the temple, the villagers avoided the topic. Some of them changed the subject. Others simply walked away. Finally, Daniel decided to ask the oldest man in the village. His name was Raghav. Raghav sat under the large banyan tree every evening, watching the village quietly. Daniel walked up to him and sat beside him. "Sir," Daniel said calmly, "I heard there's an old temple here." Raghav didn't respond immediately. He kept staring at the ground. Then slowly, he looked up at Daniel. "You can visit the temple," the old man said, "but only during the day." Daniel smiled. "Why?" The old man's face suddenly became serious. "Because after midnight," he said quietly, "the temple doesn't belong to us anymore." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" For a moment, the old man looked like he wanted to say something more, but instead he simply shook his head. "You're not from here," he said. "You wouldn't understand." Daniel leaned forward. "Try me." The old man sighed. Then he spoke slowly. "Sometimes a shadow appears inside the temple." Daniel frowned. "A shadow?" Raghav nodded. "Yes, but it's not attached to anyone." Daniel laughed softly. "Probably just someone walking past a light source." The old man didn't laugh. Instead, his eyes grew darker. "Every time someone sees that shadow," he said, "something bad happens the next day." Daniel stared at him for a moment. He had heard many strange stories during his travels. Ghost stories, village legends, urban myths. But most of the time, they had simple explanations. Daniel smiled again. "Well," he said, "I guess I'll just have to see it myself." The old man suddenly grabbed his arm. His grip was surprisingly strong for someone so old. "Don't!" Daniel looked at him, surprised. "If you see it," Raghav whispered, "the shadow might see you too." For the first time since arriving in the village, Daniel felt a strange chill run down his spine. But curiosity was stronger than fear. And later that night, Daniel decided to walk toward the temple, alone. And he had no idea that by the end of the night, he would see something that would change the village forever. Night of the shadow. That night, the village became unnaturally quiet. By 9 p.m., almost every house had already closed its doors. The streets that were full of people during the day were now completely empty. No laughter, no conversations, only the sound of the wind moving through the trees. Daniel sat inside the small guest house where he was staying, looking at the camera in his hands. He couldn't stop thinking about what the old man had said. If you see it, the shadow might see you too. Daniel shook his head. He had traveled across dozens of countries, visited abandoned cities, dark forests, and places where people claimed supernatural things happened. And every time, there was always a logical explanation. Still, something about this village felt different. At around 11:45 p.m., Daniel stood up. First, he grabbed his camera, a flashlight, and quietly stepped outside. The air was cold. The sky above the village was dark, filled with thousands of stars. But the village itself was silent. Every house was dark. It almost felt like the entire place was asleep or hiding. Daniel slowly walked down the dirt road toward the edge of the village. And in the distance, he could see it, the temple.
This place is incredible.
Even in the
so
darkness,
dark and
the
still.
structure looked massive. Ancient
first
stone
shot. Let's see.
walls, tall pillars, and the large
Whoa,
wooden
that
doors
flash
at the
really
entrance.
lit it up.
The temple stood beneath an enormous banyan tree, its twisted roots hanging down like long fingers. Daniel walked closer. His footsteps echoed softly against the ground. The wind blew through the leaves above him, creating a low whispering sound. For a moment, Daniel stopped. He turned and looked back toward the village. Everything was still. No lights, no people, just darkness. He turned back to the temple and stepped inside. The temple interior was darker than he expected. His flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing old stone carvings on the walls. Statues covered in dust, broken lamps, and at the center of the temple, a large stone altar. Daniel lifted his camera and began taking pictures. Click, click, click. The flash briefly illuminated the room each time. For several minutes, nothing unusual happened, just silence. Daniel almost laughed. Maybe the villagers were simply afraid of an old building. But then, something changed. Daniel suddenly felt a strange drop in temperature. The air inside the temple became colder, much colder. The wind outside had completely stopped. And now the silence felt heavier. Daniel slowly lowered his camera, and that's when he noticed something strange. On the floor, right in front of the altar, there was a shadow. At first, Daniel thought it was his own shadow, but when he moved his flashlight, the shadow didn't move. Daniel froze. His heart began beating faster. He slowly raised the flashlight and looked around the room. There was no one else inside. No object that could create that shadow. Nothing. But the shadow on the floor was still there. And then, very slowly, the shadow began to stretch. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The shadow moved across the floor, then up the side of the stone altar, as if something invisible was standing there. Something tall, something human-shaped. But there was no body, only the shadow. Daniel slowly lifted his camera. His hands were shaking now. Click. The camera flash filled the temple with bright white light. For a split second, Daniel thought he saw something standing behind the altar, a tall, dark figure. But when the flash faded, the altar was empty. Daniel swallowed hard. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, this is weird." He looked back at the shadow, but now, the shadow had moved again. It was no longer near the altar. Now it was on the wall, and it looked taller, much taller. Daniel's chest tightened, because suddenly, the shadow began to move toward him. Not fast, slowly, like something walking. Step, step, step. Daniel stepped backward, his flashlight shaking in his hand. "Nope," he muttered. "I'm leaving." He turned and started walking toward the exit. But before he reached the door, the temperature dropped again, so suddenly that Daniel could see his own breath in the air. And behind him, something moved. Daniel stopped. He didn't want to look, but he had to. Slowly, he turned around, and what he saw made his entire body freeze. The shadow was no longer on the wall. It was now standing in the middle of the temple floor, tall, still, and facing him. But shadows don't stand by themselves. Shadows need something to create them. And yet, there was nothing there. Just darkness shaped like a human figure. Then suddenly, the shadow's head tilted, as if it was looking directly at Daniel. And at that exact moment, Daniel's camera screen flickered. He glanced down at it. The camera had automatically captured a photo. Daniel slowly looked at the image, watching his blood ran cold. Because in the photo, the shadow wasn't alone. Standing behind it was a tall, dark figure with glowing white eyes. Daniel dropped the camera and ran. He didn't stop running until he reached the village. But as he reached the first house, he heard something behind him. Footsteps, slow, heavy, following him. And that's when Daniel realized something terrifying. The shadow had followed him out of the temple. The curse of the temple. Daniel didn't stop running until he reached the center of the village. His breathing was heavy, and his heart was pounding so loudly he could hear it in his ears. The streets were still empty. Every door was closed. Every window was dark. For a moment, he thought he had escaped whatever was inside the temple. Then he heard it again. Footsteps, slow, heavy, behind him. Daniel turned around quickly. The road behind him was empty. No one was there. The temple stood far away in the darkness at the edge of the village. Daniel forced himself to breathe. "Calm down, you're imagining things," he whispered. But then something strange happened. A light suddenly turned on inside one of the houses. Then another, and another. Doors began opening. Villagers slowly stepped outside. They were looking directly at Daniel, but the expressions on their faces were not curious. They were terrified. Raghav, the old man, pushed through the small crowd and walked toward Daniel. "You went to the temple, didn't you?" he asked quietly. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. For a moment, no one spoke. The villagers looked at each other in silence. Raghav closed his eyes. "You saw it," he said. It wasn't a question. Daniel swallowed. "Yes." The villagers began whispering to each other. Fear spread through the crowd. One woman covered her mouth. A man stepped backward, like he had just heard terrible news. Daniel looked confused. "What's wrong with all of you?" he asked. "It was just a shadow. Maybe some kind of illusion." But Raghav shook his head slowly. "You don't understand," he said. "When someone sees the shadow," he paused, "the curse begins." Before Daniel could respond, a loud crash echoed across the village. Everyone turned. A house at the far end of the road suddenly burst into flames. Bright orange fire shot through the roof. People screamed. Villagers started running toward the burning house. Buckets of water were thrown, but the fire spread unnaturally fast. Within minutes, the entire building was burning. Daniel stared in shock. "What the hell just happened?" he whispered. Raghav looked at the fire with hollow eyes. "It has started." Daniel turned toward him. "What do you mean, started?" The old man spoke quietly. "Every time someone sees the shadow, the village suffers." Daniel shook his head. That's just coincidence." But before anyone could speak again, another scream echoed through the village. This time it came from near the fields. Two farmers came running toward the crowd. Their faces were pale. "Our cattle! They're all dead!" one of them shouted. The villagers gasped. Daniel felt a cold wave run down his spine. Fire, dead animals, all within minutes. Raghav looked directly at Daniel. "You brought it back." Daniel's eyes widened. "What?" "The shadow never leaves the temple," Raghav said, "unless someone sees it." Daniel suddenly remembered something. The footsteps behind him on the road. His stomach tightened. "You think it followed me?" Raghav didn't answer. Instead, he slowly turned his head toward the dark road behind Daniel. The villagers followed his gaze. Everyone became silent. Because something was standing at the end of the street. A shape, tall, still, under the faint moonlight. It looked like a person, but darker than the night itself. No face, no body, just a moving shadow standing in the middle of the road. The villagers stepped backward in fear. No one dared to move closer. Daniel felt his legs trembling. That's impossible," he whispered. The shadow didn't move. It just stood there, watching, Then slowly, it began walking toward the village, one step, then another. The ground beneath it seemed darker with every step. The villagers panicked. "Get inside!" and someone shouted. People ran toward their homes. Doors slammed shut. Within seconds, the street was empty again. Only Daniel and Raghav remained standing outside. The shadow was getting closer, and Daniel could feel the cold air around him again, the same freezing temperature he felt inside the temple. Raghav grabbed Daniel's arm. "There's only one way to stop it." Daniel looked at him quickly. "How?" "You must return it to the temple." Daniel's eyes widened. "You want me to go back there?" Raghav nodded. "If the shadow stays in the village, the curse will destroy everything." The shadow was now only a few meters away. Daniel could hear something strange now, a low whispering sound, like dozens of voices speaking at once. His fear was overwhelming, but he knew Raghav was right. If the shadow had followed him, then he had to finish this. Daniel slowly picked up his camera from the ground. He turned toward the temple road. "Come on," he said quietly. Behind him, the shadow continued walking. Following him again, back toward the ancient temple. The villagers watched silently from behind their doors. And deep inside the dark temple, something seemed to be waiting. Because this time, the shadow wasn't coming back alone.